Hey, what's going on? This week I have something really special for you. I sat down with one of my favorite harmonica players, Roly Platt, and we had a far-reaching conversation that covered so many different topics. I think you'll find it to be incredibly insightful. We talked about performing and harmonica gear and getting a really great tone and what you should do when you practice, and I think you'll learn a lot from our conversation. Roly just released a book called No Seriously, I Play Harmonica. It's really great, kind of autobiographical, but at the same point shares a lot of his perspectives on music and harmonica playing, and I think that you should go and check it out. But let's hear from Roly himself. I hope you stay to the end of the interview, and you'll find links to purchase his book down below in the description. Let's go and get started. Roly, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jonah. I appreciate you having me on your podcast, for sure.
Great. Awesome. So I just want to acknowledge right off the beginning, when I started playing the harmonica, I wasn't a harmonica player to begin with. I was a guitar player. And when I got into harmonica, I was like, is this a serious instrument? I don't really know. Do people take this seriously? And it was actually one of your videos, your cover of Somewhere Over the Rainbow just blew me away. And that was actually one of the moments, personally, I was like, oh, this is a real thing. Like, people are doing this in a masterful way. So I just want to
going to interrupt you. I was going to interrupt you when you said you went from guitar to harmonica. I'm thinking, okay, there's some kind of mental problem here.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So you talk about, right in the very beginning of the book, you're like talking to one of your guidance counselors, and he's like, "What do you want to do? I want to be a musician. What do you play? Harmonica." Okay, good luck with that, kid. What has your experience been with, how people take you as a harmonica player? It's kind of niche, this thing that we do. Have you?
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, it circles. I mean, even within the music business, it's got a bit of a stigma attached to it. But out in the general public, you go to a party or something, and somebody's a bank manager, this other person's, a fireman. What do you do? And I play harmonica, and I do it tongue in cheek because I know it's I know the reaction. I mean, most people are polite about it and think it's quite interesting, more out of really, it's like telling somebody you're I do a high diving act or something at the circus. Oh, yeah. It's probably more interesting than it is anything else, but
yeah, in my experience, when I go up on stage, right, people are like, whoa, I've never heard a harmonica player like that before. I mean, so it's kind of funny, like people don't take it super seriously, but at the same point, it's easy to kind of blow people's minds because they've never heard it before, right?
Yeah, I was just speaking to a student about that you don't have to be particularly good to get on stage and get a good reaction from the audience. And people just like it, I think as a general thing. I liked it from the beginning because it's the sound of it, and it's a little bit like the human voice. It's exactly. It's cool because it's small. It's just it's a neat instrument. It's a very neat instrument.
Awesome. How'd you get started with the harmonica? Where was the impetus for like, I'm actually going to learn how to play this thing?
It was my older brother played a little bit, and but the biggest thing he did influence-wise was sort of turn me on to a lot of different music, blues music. And it was when he brought home the double live Butterfield album and basically said, listen to this, it's good. He was about 6 years older than me, so the rebellious younger brother, I put it on the turntable and I listened to it. But I didn't get it. Some of the tunes on that album were more jazzy. The band was quite jazzy in comparison to anything traditional blues. And then after listening, there was one or two songs that broke through and felt the emotion in what he was doing. He reminded me, because I was listening to a lot of rock music, stuff that most teenagers in the 70s were listening to. And his playing reminded me of the emotion that a rock guitar player could do, where they're bending notes and they're that kind of stuff. And I suddenly felt that in the harmonica, and I hadn't really heard that before. And I still think he, it kind of introduced that direction in harmonica, in the harmonica world that, that hadn't been until that point.
Sure.
That emotion and soul.
Awesome. Yeah, I love Butterfield. He's great. So let's actually dig into this a little bit. So when you were learning, learning the harmonica these days is very different than when you picked it up. Really, we're talking pre-internet versus internet era of harmonica, before way less resources. There's kind of this almost like apprenticeship kind of vibe that you have with different players. So can you explore that? Like, what was learning harmonica before, especially, to a lot of people who are watching this right now have only experienced learning the harmonica with the age of all these YouTube videos and all of that.
Right.
What was it like back then? And what could modern players learn from how you used to learn when you were picking this up?
We didn't even have harmonicas back then. We just had to pretend we were playing. For me, because like you said, I not only learned in that era, but most of my career was spent sort of during that time. And now when I watch people learning how to play, I'm like, really? That's how you're doing it? It's great. In so many ways, it's great. For me, it was, like you said, it was all by ear. I don't know any music theory. There's most of the players that I would run into didn't really know much theory at all. You would buy albums, you would learn from listening over and over and over again, put the turntable on and sit there and play. You're always playing. That's one of the things I stress in the book, is that, it's a bit of a slow way to get from A to B at times, but while you're walking that distance, you're learning, you're hearing things in the music. All these things have to take place, as you know, with any instrument, have to happen sort of simultaneously. You have to be able to play in music. And one of the things that method of playing along to albums, I'm playing with some of the best players in the world. I'm playing in grooves, all these different feels and different players who play differently. And I'm not thinking about it, but I'm absorbing what they're doing and reacting to what they're doing. And the other component was the going out to clubs and back. I lived in Toronto at the time in Canada, and I would go out to clubs when I was 17, sneak out from school, before I quit school. And just see bands, 6 nights a week, because the bands played. If you had a gig, you played from Monday to Saturday, and sometimes even twice on the Saturday. So you'd get to see, there was a pretty good blues scene in Canada, in Toronto. And yeah, you go out and see, but it wasn't like the internet where everybody, here's my amplifier and here's every setting and here's every technique that I use all laid out on the stage for everybody to pick up and walk away with. You have to get to know the players. You have to be welcomed into their little world, which is just the way things are, in the world, or jump into a conversation like you do online now, or you ask a question and some of the greatest players in the world will answer your question. What? There was a lot more of sort of earning that respect, the mentoring aspect. If you were lucky, you might get 1 or 2 players that would kind of help you out, or at least get you up to play, which was the biggest thing they could do, I think, to help you out, was let you walk on stage, because that's a whole nother world. Like playing at home is one thing, and lessons online, all great tools, but you step on stage and it's like, training to be a boxer on a heavy bag at home, and then your first fight is like a big fight somewhere. Oh, that's a little different.
So let's dig into that a little bit. So I think a lot of players these days, and of course there's obviously a change in culture and different, amount of opportunities to go on stage these days. But I know a lot of the musicians that I talk to are afraid to go up on stage, or it's not even a consideration in their minds. I don't know if that's your experience as well, but that's definitely mine. So can you, tell me, what are people missing when they don't perform either on stage or even just in front of people in general?
Yeah, I mean, music is meant to be, most music that I think of is meant to be, an interaction with other musicians. It doesn't have to be. But because of the opportunity to play online now, you can post a video of yourself with your cell phone. Boom, you've got a video. And it's great for that reason. But what playing on stage does for you is it's like stepping into a war zone a little bit. Like you can think about how to play and all these things and I do it at home. I'll be learning something or working on stuff. And then you get on stage and it's happening in real time. And suddenly you realize the band doesn't sound anything like the record you were practicing to. The drummer's not playing what he's supposed to be playing. You can't hear. The guitar player is too loud, or you're not loud enough, or whatever. All these elements come into play, and it just sounds completely different than you're used to. And it's loud. It's really loud sometimes. And you have to sort of, what you were playing at home doesn't quite fit the way it doesn't sound the same. So now what do you do? So that experience of having to pay attention to what's actually happening in real time, not just, working stuff out, but what do I do right now? Because I'm standing here. And you learn the hard way, trial by fire, to adapt, to go, what, I need my own amplifier next time, or, all the technical aspects of it. And every band is different. So you learn how to watch what's happening in real time on stage, the cues that people give, how some, less than professional bands tend to not pay attention to some of that. And it's not really a good training ground. I mean, it's a good training ground because you have to survive. So that's good. But when you're with a great band, they know maybe you're new, you're a guest on stage, and they will cue you for certain things. They're aware that you're waiting to find out, what am I supposed to do? So it's all those elements that, and it's different in every situation. And that's the other component to it. Every stage is different as far as the sound and that type of thing.
Yeah. So a lot of what you're talking about, just being honest, it sounds like a lot of stress. I mean, I'm a performer too. I totally understand what you're talking about, right? But let's take this from a different angle. You've been, you got a whole book of stories here from your whole career as a harmonica player. What has, facing this challenge of performing, done for not only your growth as a musician, but also your growth just as a human on an emotional and spiritual level?
Yeah. I mean, so that was that's the bad news, I guess, getting up to play with a band. Perhaps I painted a bit of a dark picture. It's just, I think that's what people are afraid of, a bad experience with it when they first get up. And it's like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm nervous, Yeah. That goes away, and you start to feel comfortable. When I first started, I felt so out of my element. I'm an introvert by nature, so standing on stage is like, okay, and you realize everybody's looking, and you have to get over that, and really you get over it by just forgetting yourself a little bit and paying attention to the task at hand. But once you're used to that a little bit, the gift of, and have an audience actually sit and listen to you, or at least some of the time, is really rewarding, and the reason that we all play. I mean, that's the reason that I played in the beginning, and still do. I was going to say at the beginning, it's totally about that for me. You realize, and I think the longer you play, the more you realize that it's a gift. And I don't mean a gift like, oh, I'm gifted. I mean, it's literally, it's a gift to be able to do it, and have people enjoy it, to bring joy or bring, some excitement to them, or just like they go, man, that was so good. I don't know what else I can say about it. It's just, performing for people is very rewarding. Expressing myself for myself. and maybe we'll get into a bit of that with the book, that was a different lane for me and a different level of expression. I've always had the music expression through harmonica. The book was like on a different level. So that's kind of neat as well, having that secondary sort of expression. But it's really about emotional expression for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I very much agree with you. Now, let's say, you got up on stage all the time. What have you learned in your career of being a performer on harmonica about being a better player on stage, about being a better member of the team of a band?
Yeah, that's what I've spent most of my career doing. And I learned it. I jumped full-time band at 18 years old. I've been playing for about a year and a half. And I just started playing full-time with them. We hit the road around Southern Ontario. What I learned was right away was some of the basic stuff, talking about things you learn on stage or playing on stage versus at home, that's a huge part of it, is how to be a good sideman. I was also told right away about, mentioned in the book about, it's like a team, you're a team member. And like any team, you work together. And not, there isn't one person that gets all the glory or whatever. You kind of share the spotlight and everybody gets a turn with the ball. That's what it was explained to me, because I didn't understand when to play, when not to. And I know in hindsight, I'm sure I played over top of some people's fills and things. Solos are a little more obvious. So you learn those types of things, when to play, when not to. And harmonica, like a few other instruments, it's more of a lead instrument. You have to be very careful. And I learned early on, in general, don't play over the singer. He likes it when the harmonica player is playing while they're singing. At least certainly not playing a lead type of thing. There are things you can do that will fit underneath, but you have to think differently about it. So stuff like that, the basic sort of, how do you work as a team?
For sure. It's very easy to step on people's toes with this instrument, especially because, I feel like getting up on stage, it's a little bit of a power trip, right? And you got to rein yourself in a little bit. It's not that easy to do. It's not, I don't think most people's kind of default action.
And you want to, people's natural, out of nervousness, they want to be able to show that they're already scared that they're not going to sound good. So they want to sound as good as possible. That's the whole idea. I learned early on, I think instinctively, to play for the band members, to make a good impression on the band. And that meant playing less, at times. As I'm saying this, I'm thinking of people that had me up on stage when I first started, going, what, really? You think you played less? But at some point I learned that, where you're being respectful of them. And the biggest thing that does is you may not dazzle the audience, but you're going to get asked back by the band, which is to me was the whole point, to have a band or two or three that you could sit in with. You're not going to F up the show. You're going to be a good team member, a good band member. It's huge.
Just because you write about so many stories in this book, what was one of the most, can you tell me the story of one of the most impactful performances you've ever had in your career as a player?
There's a little section in the book where it was towards, when I was nearing completion of the book and I wrote it. And I realized that I've been asked that question, what's the most, memorable thing? And I always refer to this video session I ever did for a big commercial, the big concert I did somewhere else. And I can name some of those, but I always feel like, it's just, tooting my own horn or something. But I also realized memorable moments, and this would happen all the time, was playing in my first band, after we're done, it's 1:32 in the morning, we go up to our hotel rooms, and the lead singer, bass player, Phil, or a couple of them, would have guitars with them. Pull out an old parlor guitar, acoustic guitar, and start playing all these old tunes that he knew that we didn't do on stage. And we'd sit on the floor, on the bed. I'd pull out my harp. Somebody else would grab their guitar, and we'd jam for nobody except ourselves. And we're listening to each other play, and it was those moments for me, especially when I was young, made me feel like a real musician, because I kind of instinctively knew I was doing this for the love of just playing. And the guys that I was playing with was a bit of a family for me, at that time. We were very close. I never had that same situation any time after that. That was a unique thing, which I learned over the years as well.
I think there's a lot of players these days who, they have their harmonica, they're in their house, they're watching videos, they're playing over backing tracks, and they haven't really had that experience of really what music I feel like is at a deep level is it's emotional communication. I mean, that's what it is. And I always find it perplexing that so many players get into this, but it's like, that's not even part of their goal that they're working towards. So, if you're watching this video right now, like, I just want to be clear, and from what Roly said too, if you don't approach this like that's what this is about. There's a whole bunch of different levels, right? And yes, of course, it's fun to, just kind of play music and, hey, I got this song together and stuff, but I don't feel like you really feel like a musician until you are having a situation like you had, where you're sitting around with a bunch of other people and you're playing music and you're going back and forth. It's a very dynamic and human experience. And, if you're watching this video and you haven't had that yet, really suggest you put yourself in those situations where you can. Doesn't even mean you need to go up on stage, right? It's just, this is a way to connect with other people. And I think a lot of players kind of diminish the importance of that. And I just want to state right now, it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. Yeah, exactly. There's different ways I suppose, to do it, to find people in your neighborhood or area that you can jam with. And, hopefully it's with the right people. And I mean, those situations can be a bit discouraging too, because there's egos, and there's guys that you're playing with, people that have never done what we're talking about, where they've never been on stage either. So you can get some bad stuff happening, but somehow you should be able to seek out the opportunity to play, even if it's maybe going to a workshop where that's probably a great type of thing, because it's set up, with the right attitude and the right encouraging type of thing. But in the end, like you said, it's about learning to express, learning to work with other, exchange, and play with. It's one thing to rehearse something and sort of execute it, but just that little bit of eye contact or body language that you get on stage, where the people are probably going, how did he know it was going to do that in the song? And it's the guy moved his head like this, it's enough, right? When he does that means it's going to the chorus, or he went like, like this, those little nuanced things that you just, or the drummer does an extra beat somewhere and you go, oh, it's going to do this now. My whole thing, and I teach it as well, is you have to enjoy playing, or you're not going to do it. Like, you can you could do it the other way, where you just, okay, I got to learn this and I got to learn that. The thing you want to encourage the most is having fun while you're playing, because it's not going to feel like work, and you're still practicing, whether you realize it or not. You're still absorbing rhythm and all those things I mentioned, playing along to tracks. And
yeah, I find in my experience, I've been working with students for years, and I have a program where I find that a lot of people really do lock into that. I'm learning. I got to do this riff. Oh, it sounds like garbage. I'm a terrible person. It's like all the mind spirals, right? Yeah. What should people do differently? How should they approach practice differently? How should they approach their relationship with actually enjoying this instrument? So they can get to a place where they're like, I enjoy playing, and that gets them to stay with it in the long run. Because I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, and I think you have to give yourself permission to play as in like a child playing. It's a crucial part of any of this, of any creative field. but you have to give yourself permission to make mistakes, to explore, right? I talk about it a bit in the book because I thought, God, seems so obvious that people are going to think it's why even bother mention this stuff? But your environment of where you're playing, you want to be able to play freely without feeling like, people are listening, or, I'm embarrassed to try this because I'm in a house and I don't want to turn it up too loud. I mean, sometimes that's all you have, and that's fine. But if you can create an environment where you can just go effing nuts in your little room, like, soundproof room, whatever you can, in your basement, go somewhere where you can experiment without the worry of anybody judging you. Because that's one of the barriers is people feel like they don't want to make mistakes. They're trying to learn a specific thing. You've got to stay within the guardrails here. And no, you don't. You don't have to do that at all. You want to try and execute the exercise. If that's your goal, try and do that. But then start messing with it. It's Play-Doh. This is, everything that we practice can be twisted into a million different things. And that's the playing part. And that's the part that we want to nurture. And like I said, the environment is a big part of it. Let's say I'm trying to sing, which is not my comfort zone. I got to work at it, and so when I do, I'm aware she's listening. Oh God, I better sing well. I don't want to. I shouldn't have to do that. That holds me back from doing what I'm talking about. Where I had that freedom, I was very fortunate when I was starting out that I had the freedom. And I never felt restricted that way. I could experiment. I used to buy pedals, try and experiment with sounds, and trying just experimenting with tons of stuff. It's a huge part of it. And if you can give yourself permission to do that, then you start getting in tune with that little creative part of you that goes, "Hey, I'm going to do this. Oh, so and so didn't do that. Ooh, Yeah.
I think the point of having an environment where you can really let loose and you can bring the volume. I think a lot of people really underestimate how much volume matters and how you feel about this. A lot of people really shy away from letting it really crank, hooking an amp up and, doing all that. And, it really does change things. I remember at one point I was living in an apartment and the landlord lived on the floor above. Right. And I didn't play harmonica at the time. I was a guitar player and I was a songwriter. That's what I spent my time doing. I was writing songs. And one day he busts into my apartment and he's like, "I'm going to smash that effing guitar." And he thought the whole time for months on end that I was singing songs about him, of how he's a terrible person and blah, blah, blah. Right. And I got to say though, after that, can't say I really let it go very much. It really makes a difference.
That's great.
All right. Let's talk about actual harmonica playing, technique and tone. A lot of players, when I talk to people, feel like their playing is very kind of plain and pedestrian, and they're looking for that extra little bit of secret sauce, whatever that is, to make their playing great. What advice do you have for players who feel like they kind of can play this thing, but they don't sound like the pros?
Yeah, good question. A whole bunch of things. One is playing with authority. So whatever you play, whatever notes you play, I'm not throwing away any notes and that's something that I sort of tried to be aware of when I was younger, was whatever I played, I wanted to make sure that it was intentional. Play with intention. Just pay attention to every note you play and how it sounds. So, playing with some authority sometimes just means with a little bit of energy behind it, a little bit of force. It's meant to be, pushed. And there's things that sound good when they're pushed. And if everything is controlled and it's there's times when that's going to sound good in the right place. It's not very expressive. The other elements that come into play is the small details in somebody's playing. How you play a note. So you can play a note, short and sweet like that, fairly good attack on it, or you can go where it's like a puff of air each time you're playing. A lot of players play like that, or you can play that little scoop going into the note. When you're playing, you don't hear them, but if you were to remove all those elements, it's dry as a bone. It just doesn't do anything. So those are I was going to go back to just how you play a note. Finishing that last note. The last note is the last thing people hear, especially if you're playing, phrases, which is another element to sounding good. But the last thing you play, like everything else is, quickly going by, then it just lands on that last note. You can do that, and in context with the music, that might sound just fine. But to me, a lot of times it sounds better if you can. So I'm adding a tiny bit of vibrato, a couple of puffs. But the bigger part, I guess, is that tapering off aspect. And you can do that going into a note, and you can do that going out of a note. There is no right way to do it. It's having the control on those things that allow you to express. So just like language or anything else, learn all these things, and then you have to figure out when to use each one, what's going to sound good. Glisses. So there's like few things happening there. A little bit of a gliss where I'm sliding down. You don't even want to hear it. You just want to, it's just something. There was something there before the big note. I'm hitting that note with authority. And that double bend on two, it just sounds intentional when you put it all together. Those are some of the basic things, that I would point out, I guess.
Well, I think a lot of that was, especially the whole playing with authority, just really like what you're going to play, like mean it, really, really try at it. Don't waste notes. Don't play mindlessly. I think that's all really good advice. And of course, there's all these little micro things going on that really do take your tone to the next level. So one thing that I found that was pretty curious about your answer, and I think we're on the same page here, but you didn't say anything about what brand of harmonica that you're playing or anything like that. What's your take on the importance of gear versus like your own internal sound?
It's one of my pet peeves, or not pet peeves, but I feel quite strongly about it. I'll get questions like, man, they watched my video and I love your sound, your tone. It's just so great. What kind of microphone is that? And I always going, it depends on why you're asking. If you've got 4 mics or whatever, and you think you might like the one I've got, I'm happy to tell you that's not a secret. But usually I'd say 90% of the time people ask that, especially following the statement, I really love your sound. What amplifier is that? The equipment is not going to give you that sound. The sound, we've all heard it from various players and things like that. The sound comes from the player. Does gear matter? Of course it matters. It matters, but it only matters if you have some of the other skills together. And I do believe, and I did it myself, there were years where I didn't have the money to buy any fancy gear or vintage stuff, even a tube amp, a little practice amp that was terrible for really, but it had some distortion. It's the same technique. To get that thing to sound half decent took exactly the same technique as a really fine old tube amp would. It's the cupping of the mic. It's the how you play the harmonica itself. You're like, people say, well, you have to have good acoustic tone, and then you can do that through an amp. I think there's 2 stages. You need good acoustic tone just to be able to play the notes solidly and with authority and tone. But then you need to adapt that technique, because guys that have never picked up a microphone into an amp and their first time playing through it are not going to sound particularly great at it. There's a technique you do acoustically and making that come out the amplifier. And that's a listening process. That's listening to the amp that you're playing through, not the amp that, somebody said is going to be good. You have to do it through the mic and the amp you're playing through. Listen to what it does. What happens when I open and close my hand? What happens when I cup it, completely seal it up? Does it get too weird sounding? All those things you have to learn with whatever piece of gear you're doing. And it's that experimenting that gives you, will improve your tone. What type of harmonica I play, I'm a Seidel endorser now, endorsee. This is a 1847 classic with the wood comb, which this is my favorite out of the steel reed versions they have. I'm an endorsee, but I became an endorsee because I really like their harps. And I chose them not necessarily because they play way better than Honors or Suzuki's or any other brand. And I heard about these steel reeds, and people were saying they last 5 times as long or 20 times as long. I wound up buying one myself and putting it through the paces. I bought a D, and I played the crap out of it for probably a year. And it lasted... it probably lasted 5 times as long as one of my regular harps. I'm convinced these last significantly, whatever that is, like way longer than a regular harp does. And for me, I'm a very aggressive player when I'm on stage. I play hard. I feel very confident when I'm playing these that I'm not gonna, if I pick up a brass reed harp now, I'm always like, be careful, don't hurt me. I feel like I can play freely on these without fear of wrecking them.
Sure. Just digging into the gear side of things just a little bit. I know that you're a big fan of altered tunings. Can you give a brief introduction of the different tunings that you've tried and what you think about them or what you generally gravitate to?
Actually, I'm not today's standards. I'm very traditional. I'm realizing I was very progressive when I was younger. now I'm the old guy that's not with it anymore. I'm very simple in my choice of tunings. Probably because I'm a slow learner with new things. What I find on any kind of new tuning or whatever it is, something different like that, is I need to be so comfortable on that setup of where the notes are that I feel I own it. It's internalized, and I can get on stage and just play freely, because that's basically how I'm playing every night. I'm not memorizing things really. I'm improvising 90% of the time. And I need that freedom of when I go up there, I know what note that's gonna be, what it's gonna sound like. So I keep it as simple as possible. One tuning that I came across when I was probably 21 was what is now called country tuning. And somebody in the studio that I was doing a session on said that he just did a session with Charlie McCoy, one of my idols. He says, "Did you know he tunes his harmonicas?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I didn't know he did, but I was just learning to file the reeds to tune them, like back to the proper pitch." And I said, "Yes, I'm learning to repair them like that." And he goes, "No, I don't mean repair them. He tunes them to a different note." And I go, "Really?" I said, "What note?" He goes, "I don't know." I'm like, "What? Don't tell me that." And I went home and filed all my harps, all these different reeds to try and find it until I came across the country tune, which is so old school now. But at the time when I was using that, nobody was using that, like Charlie was. It opens up for melodic playing and melodies and things like that. It opens up the full major scale and just, it's very cool. Besides overblowing, that you can The other one is simply filing the 7-hole draw down a semitone. So you get the major third on 7 draw, and I file it down so I get the flat 3, which is, like that note that we get in the low end, which is, blues note you would want up high. The issue is when you do that you can't play you can play the major 7th, but it's a blow bend, which makes it pretty awkward. So you lose all these things. You gain something, and sometimes you lose a little bit as well. But that's one that I will use for certain songs. And there's some cool things, again, with that tuning, just because of the nature where the notes are lined up beside each other, that you can do that you wouldn't be able to do with an overblow. And you can play, it's just different. It's just different. It sounds different. And those are the only 2 tunings I use. So they're really pretty lame, But I'm still working on what to do with a regular tuned harp. Still trying to figure that out.
Sure. Yeah. I think, they've been around for a while, but I think, still alternate tunings as a whole, I think are new for most players. I find that a lot of people these days want to go in the overblow direction, which is fine. But, overblows, they're so hard to get them reliable. They're so hard. Not impossible, obviously, but
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you have a lot of great wisdom in this book about harmonica playing and a lot of amazing stories. So I'd like to just wrap it up with this. For the harmonica player these days who's struggling to really get a grasp on this thing, what advice would you give them?
Play the tracks, copying, listening, using your ear to be your guide. And to play with passion. It doesn't mean emotion out of context emotion, because that's just as weird. It's even weirder. You want to play with the appropriate emotion for the song, and don't be afraid to try and figure out what that is. And you don't have to play a lot of notes, but you do have to be very intentional and so you need some technique to be able to execute what you're feeling or what you want it to sound like. Absolutely. And, thinking in terms of musical ideas, I guess that's one of the turning points for me that happened, where I realized I can start thinking like a composer. I mean, I'm not really, it's sort of in that direction where I'm actually trying to think of musical ideas or little phrases. The same way a comedian might figure out a way to turn a phrase that make it funnier. Here's a better way of saying that. That makes it funny. The joke could be the same, but the fact that he told it that way, is going to make all the difference in the world. And that, I think, is the same with music. You can start to think of, listen to music that way. Listen to what's happening in the music with these great players and singers. And most of the likable stuff that you hear isn't complicated. Complicated is impressive, but it's not necessarily likable the same way or emotionally moving.
That's great advice, Roly. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that if you are interested in Roly's perspective on harmonica playing, definitely go check out his book. It's full of a bunch of really great stories and more of the ideas and insights that you've heard today. So if you want to go check this out, you'll find links down below in the description, and also put a link to Roly's YouTube channel. Roly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much. Much appreciated.